Everyone says Targaryens are closer to gods than to men, but they say that because of our dragons. Without them, we're just like everyone else.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in the premiere episode of House of the Dragon. The new series focuses on House Targaryen, and most of you probably remember them from Game of Thrones. But even if you haven't seen the show Game of Thrones, this show takes place hundreds of years before. It is a fresh start. And just in case you're curious about what happened leading up to the series, we do have a video out that covers 12,000 years of Westeros history in just 12 minutes. Now, when Game of Thrones starts, the reign of the Targaryens was over with Robert Baratheon having deposed them a couple decades earlier. The scattered remnants of the family included Viserys, who didn't last long, and Daenerys, who was a major player from the beginning all the way through to her end. The new series, thankfully, doesn't move at that same breakneck who cares pace that Game of Thrones Season 8 did, where dragons and Greyjoy ships warped around Westeros faster than a coked up Mario.
I love Season 8. I love all Game of Thrones. Dragons especially.
You know, Doug, that's a great point. The worst season of Game of Thrones is better than the best season of CSI. And if you like dragons, you're going to be right at home with this new series, when the incestuous, fiery, dragon-owning Targaryens are fully in power of Westeros. And we waste no time keeping up with the Targaryens. The show opens with voiceover that tells us that we will be entering the action after a century of Targaryen rule.
As the first century of the Targaryen dynasty came to a close, the health of the old king, Jaehaerys, was failing.
King Jaehaerys sits on the Iron Throne, and the Targaryens have 10, count them up, 10 dragons on their side. Nevertheless, trouble is brewing. The king has no real heir and his health is failing. Succession is a huge issue. Now, we're told this as the familiar Targaryen theme from the Game of Thrones series plays.
Oh, I love that music. Is that going to be the same music in this show?
Yes, same composer. Riffs on the coronation theme and the main Game of Thrones theme can be heard as this sequence goes on.
The Lord, the only thing that could tear down.
The king has called all the lords and ladies of the kingdoms to Harrenhal, the burnt-out husk of a castle which fans will remember from Season 2 of Thrones. 14 claims to the throne were heard, but only 2 were actually considered, those of Princess Rhaenys and her younger cousin, Prince Viserys. He's played by Paddy Considine, who you may remember from Hot Fuzz and many other projects. Now look, the Targaryens tend to give each other the same names over and over, so if you're confused, this is not that Viserys. He is the earlier one. He is made Prince of Dragonstone, which means that he will be the heir to the Iron Throne. Now, Rhaenys is older, but she's a woman.
You're a woman.
Yes, I hope that's not a problem.
So she is overlooked, and this doesn't sit well with her. The only thing that can tear down House Targaryen was itself, and that is exactly what King Jaehaerys was hoping to avoid with this entire production. Well, at least he bought them some time. After a close-up of the Targaryen house sigil, we're told that we're cutting ahead to the 9th year in the reign of King Viserys I. In case we needed a firmer timetable, we're also told that it's 172 years before the death of the Mad King Aerys and the birth of Daenerys. Now, I was ready for some dragon action, and that is exactly what the show gives us. A golden beauty named Syrax flies over King's Landing, giving us a really good look at the Red Keep and the Great Sept of Baelor. The dragon doesn't burn the city down, which already makes this way different from the last time I saw a dragon fly over the city. Syrax lands in the Dragon Pit, which got some screen time in Seasons 7 and 8 of Thrones. She's greeted by Harold Westerling, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and he is played by the Hobbit and Outlander star Graham McTavish. So he watches in his white cloak as some attendants soothe the beast with some Valyrian. And Valyrian is the ancestral language of the Targaryens. Princess Rhaenyra hops off the dragon's back, she grabs a coach, and then rides to the Red Keep with Alicent Hightower. Alicent Hightower is very important to this show. Her father is Otto Hightower, and he is the hand to the king. And notice in this show, they haven't even changed the little badge, the same as it was in the original show. They greet her pregnant mother, Aemon Arryn, who is queen consort to Viserys and a member of the same house as these charming characters. The queen tries to prepare her daughter for giving birth herself one day.
We have royal wounds, you and I.
Whatever, but Rhaenyra is way more interested in battle and glory. The birthing bed is not her battlefield. King Viserys finishes an anecdote that probably wasn't very funny.
So I said to him, well, I believe you might be looking up the wrong end.
And then his advisor and master of ships, Lord Corlys, tells this small council that he's worried about a new threat across the Narrow Sea.
The growing alliance among the free cities has taken to styling itself the Triarchy.
Now, you'll remember that the free cities are in Essos, the continent to the east. That's like Braavos, where Arya Stark trained. Now, what he's talking about is that the 3 most powerful cities in Essos are banding together into one force that is threatening the islands to the southeast of Westeros, which are called the Stepstones. Expect this conflict to escalate as the season continues. Rhaenyra is also her king's cupbearer and daughter, and she enters still smelling of dragon. The king's absent brother, Daemon Targaryen, is briefly mentioned. Now, currently, he is commander of the City Watch. In fact, if memory serves, he is the first commander of the City Watch. He's the one who gave them their gold cloaks to wear that we saw in the original show. Now, this character is a big deal, partly because he's played by Doctor Who star Matt Smith, and the King's Hand Otto Hightower is played by Rhys Ifans. You remember, he was Kurt Connors in The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, both he and the King don't care about this triarchy nonsense over the Narrow Sea, and they want to talk about the Heirs Tournament. And they're advised about it by Grand Maester Mellos. Maesters actually still dress the same way that they will dress 172 years later. Now, this Heirs Tournament is going to be expensive, but all of the important lords and ladies of Westeros are already on their way. The King really wants his heir to be born during this tournament like a giant gender reveal party, even though they don't yet know the sex of the baby. But King Viserys is convinced that it's a boy. Rhaenyra's tour of the Red Keep continues as Westerling brings her to the throne room, saying that a certain someone arrives this morning. Now, the Iron Throne is massive in this time period, much bigger than it was on Thrones, extending itself down to the floor of the room. This is closer to its description in the novels, which basically described it as a giant mound of melted swords. Now, more notable than this is the person sitting on the throne, Rhaenyra's uncle, the aforementioned Prince Daemon. Now, Daemon dreams of ruling over Westeros himself someday, and he speaks Valyrian with Rhaenyra as she approaches. Now, Daemon at this point is the heir to the throne unless a male heir is born to Viserys.
Now wait a minute, I thought that there was going to be a bunch of dragon scrolls in the throne rooms.
I haven't seen these since Robert had them removed from the throne room.
Well, no, Doug, because the dragons are actually still alive. They will not hang those dragon skulls up until after the dragons start to die off.
Oh, I was wondering.
Daemon gives Rhaenyra a necklace made of Valyrian steel.
Like Dark Sister.
Now, Dark Sister is a famous ancestral Valyrian blade of House Targaryen. Daemon now wields it, and he says that they now both have a piece of their birthright. Now, you'll hear a lot of references to Valyria in this show. Valyria was the ancestral home of the Targaryens. It was destroyed about 100 years earlier in something called the Doom of Valyria. Afterwards, the Targaryens took their family west to Westeros. So that's what makes Valyrian blades so special. They are not making them anymore. Valyrian steel's secrets died with Valyria, and you'll remember that a few characters on Game of Thrones carried similar Valyrian blades.
Oh, careful, Your Grace. Nothing cuts like Valyrian steel.
Studying in with Alicent in the Godswood, throwing out references to Dorne, Princess Nymeria, and this is who Arya named her wolf after. The king, meanwhile, gets some attention paid to a nasty open wound of his that refuses to heal. Now, he's convinced that it's nothing and it's just from sitting on the Iron Throne. Otto Hightower is a little more worried. The king agrees to have this wound cauterized before going to see his queen. And guys, I think we can consider this wound to be Chekhov's open sore. Dragon scale, anyone?
It's as warm as the maesters will allow.
Don't they know dragons prefer heat?
This reminds us that dragons like it hot. The king is still convinced that this child is a boy because of a dream that he had. And the queen?
And I placed our son upon the Iron Throne.
She has not been very lucky with pregnancies. This is her last chance to give the king a male heir. Like, no pressure, right? Prince Daemon gives a rousing speech to the City Watch, who donned their gold cloaks.
King's Landing will learn to fear the color gold.
Now, whether Daemon is good, evil, or a bit of both, he easily stands out as the most interesting character on the show thus far. We're tempted to say it's Morbin time, but Matt Smith may not get the reference.
No, I actually didn't even know what that meant until yesterday. At the panel, because I'm not on the internet.
The gold cloaks race out of the city and start beating the hell out of anyone they even suspect of breaking the law. Daemon watches as a thief has his hand chopped off and a rapist gets his not hand chopped off. If this was Thrones, they probably would have shown it, but it's not, so they don't. Daemon himself chops off someone's head with Dark Sister, and then the next day Otto Hightower gives a report to the king. Daemon is waiting for them at the council table, and he argues with Otto about his actions. The city has to be safe for the tournament, and the king can't help but agree with him. The new City Watch might be a good thing. Otto manages to get a jab in at Daemon about neglecting his wife Rhea, who lives in the Vale. You remember the Vale with Tyrion and the Moon Door, all that stuff. Now, Daemon doesn't like the Vale, and he presumably doesn't like his wife Rhea either.
I think my bronze bitch is happier for my absence.
A good and honourable lady of the Vale.
In the Vale, men are said to f*** sheep instead of women. I can assure you, the sheep are prettier.
Daemon then gets in a jab at Otto about Otto's dead wife.
Your own lady wife passed recently. Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
So Daemon and Otto hate each other. That's the real takeaway of this, and it's going to be really important later in the season. Daemon tries to rail a woman named Mysaria, while a handful of other women watch behind a screen. This is actually mirrored later on in the episode when Daemon watches a small council meeting behind a similar screen. So, time for some sport. The king begins the tournament, which takes place in much nicer digs than the tournament that we saw in Season 1 of Thrones. He announces that the queen's labor has begun, and he has a dagger on his belt with a hilt very similar to the cat's paw dagger that Littlefinger used to cause so much trouble in the first season of Game of Thrones. The jousting commences, and a member of House Baratheon asks the favor of Rhaenys, whom he calls the Queen That Never Was. Now, in Martin's writing, a court jester named Mushroom gave her this title. Rhaenyra and Alicent are front and center for the action, making references to houses that we've heard of, including Stokeworth and Tarly.
Lord Stokeworth's daughter is promised to that young Tarly squire.
Lord Massey's son.
She asks Westerling about Sir Criston Cole, just knocked 2 Baratheons into the dirt. Not much is known about this guy, apart from him being the common-born son of Lord Dondarrion's steward. I assume that Lord Dondarrion is somehow related to Beric Dondarrion. Remember, he was the guy with the flaming sword in Thrones. So Rhaenyra's looking at this guy, and she is liking what she sees. So Daemon hits the list and chooses Otto's son, Gwaine Hightower, to be his first opponent. Master of Coin Lyman Beesbury can also be seen placing a bet on this. Beesbury, incidentally, is played by Bill Patterson, an actor who has appeared on both Outlander and Doctor Who, as well as Good Omens and The Sandman. Busy little Beesbury. Gwaine is unhorsed, and so Daemon asks the favor of Alicent Hightower, daughter of his rival.
Seriously?
Yeah, and then she gives him her favor. Otto ain't happy about this, but there's no time for this. The king is quickly called away to his wailing wife, and the Grand Maester says that she's in breach, meaning that this birth is not going well. The selectively reliable milk of the poppy is not helping.
Do something for her! We've given her as much milk of the poppy as we can without risking the child.
The joust gets more violent outside, with Rhaenys telling Corlys that the day is turning ugly.
It's been 70 years since King Maegor's end. These nights are as green as summer grass. None have known real war.
And because these knights have never seen war, they're all full of energy and rage and no healthy place to put it. So is this observation a harbinger of the Great War to come? I can't say for certain, but yeah, it is. It absolutely is. The pump is primed and war is inevitable. The dragons want to dance, if you catch my meaning. The situation is even worse inside. The Grand Maester tells King Viserys that he can either save his wife or the unborn child. Now before we get an answer, we're back to the joust where Sir Criston Cole is going up against Daemon. But as soon as they go at it, we're back inside with King Viserys' choice. He's chosen the baby. The Grand Maester starts to cut it out of her while Sir Criston unhorses Daemon. So symbolically, what's happening here is that the king's new heir is coming into the world, as his former heir, Daemon, is being diminished in combat. But the fight is not over because out comes Night Sister as Daemon chooses to continue into a melee. Sir Criston puts up a pretty good fight with his flail, but Daemon gets him down. But then he peacocks, takes his eye off the prize like Oberyn Martell.
You raped her! You murdered her! You killed her children!
So Sir Criston turns the tables. Daemon is forced to yield. Sir Criston removes his helmet and reveals that he is Dornish. Now Dorne is the land to the south that at this point has not ever technically bent the knee and become a formal part of the Seven Kingdoms. This Dornishman approaches Rhaenyra and receives her favor. The king is told that the baby is a boy. The queen consort is dead, and unfortunately, the baby dies too. All gather outside the city at a funeral pyre, and Daemon prods Rhaenyra to help her father. A dragon walks forward and lights the pyre aflame after she gives it a very familiar command.
Dracarys.
It's a word that will become Daenerys' all-time favorite over 172 years later.
Dracarys. Dracarys. Dracarys.
Dracarys.
But notice that Rhaenyra says this word with a slightly different accent, because she is more closely tied to her Valyrian roots.
Dracarys.
Dracarys.
But there's no time for grief. The small council meets and Otto Hightower presses the problem of succession.
These recent tragedies have left you without an obvious heir.
Lord Corlys argues that succession is set. Daemon is already the heir apparent. Now, if you think that Otto is going to accept this, then I got a bridge to sell you.
The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, Your Grace.
They say every time a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin and the world holds its breath.
None of them seem to know that Daemon himself is listening in on this. But then the notion comes up that the king has the power to name his own successor, and that his successor would have to be his firstborn child, Rhaenyra.
You're a woman.
The council is lightning fast to point out that no queen has ever sat on the Iron Throne.
Rhaenyra. A girl. I love working with women. Let me rephrase that. I will work with women.
Otto drives this home further, believing that Daemon as king would be as bad as a second Maegor.
Impulsive and violent. It is the duty of this council to protect the king and the realm from him.
So, in the book, Maegor Targaryen was known as the Cruel and the Abomination on the Iron Throne, and he definitely lived up to those titles. Maegor was the worst, meanest, ugliest king that ever sat in the Iron Throne. So, right now, are Rhaenyra and Daemon the only options? But King Viserys has had enough and shouts them all to be silent. Corlys puts in a word for Rhaenys.
My wife and son are dead!
I just want my kids back.
Otto sends a raven to Old Town, where the citadel of the Maesters reside.
I've never seen so many books in all my life.
He also sends for a visibly shaken Alicent and tells her to visit King Viserys and give him comfort.
His chambers.
I don't know how I feel about Otto right now. Is he just like pimping out his daughter and stuff?
Yeah, man, it looks like he's playing the game, that's for sure. Otto gets what he wanted, though, because Alicent visits the king in one of her mother's dresses with a big book of history in her hands. She speaks words of comfort to the king while he works on a model of King's Landing. Nothing torrid here. At least not yet. But Daemon's game is going strong in a pleasure house on the Street of Silk. Everyone toasts that he is the heir once more, and Daemon gives a speech.
Gods give just as the gods take away.
He's not so easily replaced. We cut to Otto the following morning, who reports this to the king. What did Daemon do next? He made a toast to the king's dead newborn and called him heir for a day. This party was a celebration of the king's misery. We then see King Viserys sitting on the giant Iron Throne himself as Daemon enters the throne room. He asks if he really said what was reported, and Daemon's response is,
"We must all mourn in our own way."
Anger and resentment pour out of them both as Daemon dunks on Otto Hightower for being a worthless second son.
A second son who stands to inherit nothing he doesn't seize for himself.
He calls Viserys weak. In response, Viserys says that he's decided to name a new heir. Daemon will return to the Vale at once on the king's command. So then the king pricks his finger on the Iron Throne, and symbolically this is very important. The reason Aegon had this throne made from the swords of his defeated enemies is because a king can never get too comfortable on this throne. They had to understand that their position was always in danger. In the case of King Viserys, Daemon's right. He is a weak king. He tries to appease everybody. So this little tiny cut is showing that there is a weakness in his rule that is soon about to be exploited in war. So then the king appears before a set of lit candles under the skull of Balerion. That's the dragon that belonged to Aegon the Conqueror. Rhaenyra joins him and he tells her that Balerion was the last creature that saw Valyria before the doom. And then he asks her,
"When you look at the dragons, what do you see?"
Rhaenyra is confused and shaken, but King Viserys demands an answer.
Everyone says Targaryens are closer to gods than to men. But they say that because of our dragons. Without them, we're just like everyone else.
And then the king replies with,
"The idea that we control the dragons is an illusion."
He then says that the dragons caused the doom of Valyria and gives her a warning. They will bring the same doom down on them if they neglect their history. And any king has to understand this. Or queen. After so many wasted years waiting for a male heir, Viserys makes the choice that was right in front of him the whole time. His heir shall be Rhaenyra. And one by one, members of the court swear new allegiance to both Viserys and Rhaenyra. Lord Corlys is first, and he swears his allegiance with the familiar phrase,
"I swear this, by the old gods and the new."
I swear it by the old gods and the new.
House Hightower and House Baratheon follow suit, followed by Rickon Stark, the Lord of Winterfell. We're guessing the Game of Thrones fans will recognize the name and the location. Viserys has also told Rhaenyra a story about Aegon the Conqueror. He was not guided by a need for conquest. It was a dream, one in which Aegon saw the end of the world of men.
"'Tis to begin with a terrible winter. Aegon saw absolute darkness riding on those winds."
And he adds,
"Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne. A king or queen, strong enough to unite the realm against the cold."
So, according to Viserys, Aegon called his dream a song of ice and fire.
That's what Sam Tarly calls the history he writes in the Thrones finale.
That's right, and it's also what George R.R. Martin calls this overall throne saga. So Viserys asked Rhaenyra to keep this secret, which has been passed down from ruler to ruler since the time of Aegon himself. And it makes you realize that had Robert's rebellion not happened, this secret would have been kept with the Targaryen line, and Daenerys would have known it, instead of needing Jon Snow to convince her to go off and fight the White Walkers. So then Daemon flies off on his dragon as as Viserys officially declares Rhaenyra his heir in front of the entire court. The familiar strains of the main Game of Thrones title music begin to play once more and continues to play over the end credits. So I guess that winter is coming once again, but it's a winter that we've already seen get defeated on another show. Now, did a Targaryen end up uniting all of Westeros against the Long Night? Kind of, yeah. They would not have defeated the White Walkers without Jon Snow, who was a stealth Targaryen, or without Daenerys Stormborn, obviously a Targaryen. The real enemy that the Long Night brought us was a horde of badly calibrated televisions, but that's another video. It is interesting that for this premiere, there was no opening credit sequence or any titles to speak of. That may change going forward, but for now, it's an interesting way to make this show different from the one that came before it. So, what can we expect to see next? In Thrones, many characters refer to a Targaryen civil war, which was called the Dance of the Dragons.
You could read about Balerion the Dread. They say you can still see his skull in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep.
Now that civil war is what this show is going to depict. Daemon flies away angry and entitled. Viserys is really not looking long for this world, and Rhaenyra is set to take his place, and the Dance of the Dragons has officially begun. But what did you think of the show? Do you have any questions? Let me know in the comments below, or you can @me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.